Welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast, where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the learning and development industry. As always, we'll be bringing some laughter and a bit of fun along the way, but more importantly, you'll get some incredible insights, key lessons, and unique perspectives on everything related and possibly unrelated to training and development. Let's get this show on the road. Hi everybody, welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast. Today we have with us Liz Villani, who is founder of Be Yourself at Work, who are a global movement dedicated to creating a new narrative around the way we work, one that allows and encourages people to bring their authentic selves and see work as an opportunity to make their own unique difference. She's a creative mind behind the movement's innovative IAM product, which helps people define their character by understanding their values. And Liz also regularly features in Management Today, Metro, Glamour, and a range of workplace and people-focused titles in the UK and around the world. Liz, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jason. I'm really pleased to be here.
So maybe just to kind of jump, that's great to have you. So there's a stat here that you've kind of mentioned, which I'm chomping at the bit to find out more about, and I didn't actually expect this to be as low as it was. So I'm fascinated to find out why. So in your research, you mentioned that just 16% of people are able to feel themselves at work. So that's one and basically from your feet to kind of your mid-torso of people in the office today who actually feel that they can be themselves, and the other 8 and whatever's left of that one person don't. So why is that?
It's fascinating, isn't it? It's I always think about when we're younger, if you've got children, especially primary school children, if you say to them, what do you want to do when you grow up? They get super excited, don't they? I want to be a pilot, I want to be a footballer, I want to be a nurse or an actress or whatever it happens to be. And the big challenge is that then they grow up. And what happens is that we all naturally want to fit in. We all start the jobs, our careers, if you like, after the education that we have. And we want to be seen as competent. And so what happens is we start to, as human beings, we naturally start to mold ourselves to fit and conform to a workplace culture and be the person we think we need to look like, if you like, and sound like in order to be successful. And so what happens over time is that we move away from who we naturally are and end up with 2 personas. Often, most people have, this is me at home and my world personally, if you like, and this is me in my professional world and how I come across there. And so most of us get lost when it comes to being us and our values because we're so busy trying to get on in our careers and look successful. That's, in essence, the main reason we find that people just aren't being them. And many people don't even realize it.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. I think I spent a lot of my formative years being something very different. And I actually remember back in the days, and I suppose they are still very popular, but you used to get these things called psychometric tests that used to try and predict who you were and how you behaved. I was never convinced that they were accurate, but I remember one in particular did exactly what you're saying. It talked about who you were in the office and who you were in the rest of your life. And I had diametrically opposed results. And I remember the person who was running the test, they said, like, how are you not the most stressed person I've ever met? So I do kind of, I get it.
Well, it's exhausting.
But hopefully
it's
I've moved on from
not
that.
Being you.
But for the it is. It's exhausting being me as well, if you were to speak to my wife. But let's not go down that rabbit hole. So the question, I suppose, that kind of follows on from that is how do we sort this out? How do we get that 16% closer to 100%?
Yeah, no, it's the number one question, isn't it? And I think a lot of it's awareness. So, people actually don't realize, like, we kind of get stuck. We're going on that treadmill of getting up and being us at work. And so we're not often aware. So one of the reasons that we work with our movement, so what we stand for is helping everyone to feel able and confident to be themselves, is to actually amplify the voice of authenticity within the working world. So it's waking us up to the fact that we might not be being who we really are, and therefore might be compromising our happiness and productivity. But it's then looking at transforming the way learning and the world of work supports people. So, when we did the stats you've quoted, we did a massive survey around the world, a global survey that looked at all the reasons why people aren't being themselves at work and what gets in the way. And one of the biggest things that gets in the way is our self-doubt. So most people, over 95% of people we know from our work, doubt themselves in some shape or form. In fact, give you an example from the survey, only 5% of us never worry what people think of us. Never worry. We just kind of are us, and that's it. And we go and make our difference and live and work authentically. And so it's really about helping all of us to stop worrying about whether we're, coming across in the right way. Accepting who we are and really feeling like we can understand and be ourselves. And that equals happiness and freedom. There's very few people in the world that, have actually managed to get to that state.
Well, other than the fact that I'm very jealous of that 5%, because I think I still suffer from imposter syndrome very often. I mean, what have those 5%? I mean, did you kind of explore what those 5% are doing differently? How did they manage to get into that space of actually just feeling more
Yeah.
confident? Was it the way that they were raised? Was it like, the nurture versus nature thing, I suppose?
I think it's a real combination. And I feel like, I guess, a really good question. It's a really good question, Jason. Um, I guess that's what I spend my life dedicated to finding out and bringing to everybody. And I think it's actually really clear, really clear. I think there are a few of us that are naturally born with a confident disposition, and have been loved and nurtured in a way that we naturally are pretty independent and strong. But for the vast majority of us, we can't tick all of those boxes. Most of us, have challenging upbringings or experiences that make us question our sense of self, that make us question whether we're good enough, are we loved, are we cared for, all of that kind of human experience that we all have. But there's definitely stages. And, we talk about obviously be yourself at work. We would say the number one thing that everybody can do, first of all, is to understand more about themselves. So, if you're going to be really comfortable in you, then you need to know yourself, like yourself, accept yourself, including all of the challenges that exist within us, and then literally live and breathe that. The second thing I find as a pattern is that most really confident people who are in that 5%, they actually live really purposefully. They don't make things about them. They will naturally support other people, and they will naturally want to give and help other people. And when something challenging happens, they question it, they get interested in it, rather than having it kind of affect them to the point where they think, well, I must have done something wrong, or there must be something wrong with me. And then the third point that I find is that people that are in that 5%, they accept that kind of being human is a journey, and they're always fascinated and growing and learning about themselves. And part of that is actually that daily ritual of choosing to feel good about yourself, choosing to sort of think positively and having hope and dreams and aspirations. And it is a choice. Most of us don't realize that. We just let life happen to us. The 95% of us, we kind of we let people affect our energy, we get fed up with things, those kind of things. Whereas the 5% know they have a choice on what they think and reflect on. So it's there for all of us. We've just got to choose to go and grab it.
Sure, that's a big ask. So just maybe kind of taking a step back, I'm really interested, Liz, on how you ended up on this journey. I mean, what was your kind of road towards getting fascinated by this? I'm really really interested to know.
No, yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to share. So, um, I mean, see, my journey, I guess, for a lot of people in my space who are entrepreneurial and kind of don't feel restricted in their work, I had quite a challenging background. I've got quite a lot of lived experience, and I class myself as a successful, socially mobile individual as well. So, I grew up in poverty in a single parent family in the 1970s and 80s. We struggled with domestic violence as well. I went to local comprehensive, so there was no silver spoon, and that creates a level of, I think, resilience within people who've had a similar experience to me. But it also creates a situation, I find, in patterns where you've got challenges, whether adults or as young people and children, where you have only got one place to go really to support yourself, and that's within. And so I guess what I did was really establish quite a strong relationship with myself, and then got fascinated that other people didn't. I found myself through work in my teenage years. It was a great escape. I've always loved work. As a teenager, I worked in restaurants. I trained as a chef, just simple things that we do when we're in our teens. But I realized that in those situations, I could be me. Nobody was telling me what to do or who to be, or what to write or what to learn. I could actually see that I could make people happy, just by the things that I did and the things that I said. So I kind of fell in love with work. I went to university in Manchester, and then I started my corporate career. So I spent my 20s in a big retailer, and I was fascinated by how people changed and adapted, and really interested. My dream growing up was to work as a food buyer. People of our age, no offense, might remember the man from Del Monte, where he went and sourced lovely oranges for us all to drink in our breakfasts. And I had this dream that if I could influence what you put in your fridge or in your cupboard, I could make you happy, and I could do that en masse for thousands of people. So that was kind of my inspiration. And when I was in that role, which I absolutely loved, I spent a lot of my time in people, helping the teams there think about how they develop people. And I realized that there were patterns of behavior as I looked around my world. I traveled the world in that role too. So I went to Australia, I went to the US, and traveled quite a lot. So I was really lucky to experience different cultures. And I saw that the patterns were the same. The light can go out of our eyes sometimes when we are exhausted and in that world of work. And so I was really inspired to think about how we could develop ourselves in a different way, and how the world of work, coming back to my teenage experience and my love of my role in my 20s, could actually be an enormous positive, a chance in our lives, maybe even the only door, the only window, that we actually get to choose what we do. Even if we're on the minimum wage, we can still choose to, drive a bus or work in a chocolate factory. Both can be enormously rewarding. So it was really about kind of helping. My journey has helped me to see that work can be something that can be enormously beneficial in you experiencing yourself, and making a difference rather than just something to pay the bills, but also your understanding of yourself and your relationship with yourself, and then the ability to help others actually is what can make people happy, as I view the patterns of behavior around the world. So I've had a interesting journey that's kind of led me to the point where I can see that all of us can really be us if we know who we are, and that can change everything.
Brilliant. And I mean, I guess just thinking quite deeply about that is, and putting myself into the kind of shoes of a lot of people who will be watching this, is people from the kind of learning fields, is I imagine that this is quite a multifaceted type of thing that you need to solve in a company. It's not just how much how you can teach people this. It's the culture of the organization. It's the leadership of the organization.
Mm.
So it's quite a systemic kind of process in a company to get them to transition from maybe being one of the companies where there is this kind of 16% of people who don't feel themselves, to being able to work on that. So
Yeah.
how do you, I mean, where do you start when you work with a new potential person or customer who says, this is a problem for us, we want to fix it?
Yeah, no, it's a really big ship to turn around. I mean, first of all, the good news is that the world is definitely already shifting. So we were already starting to talk about bringing your whole self to work, and the whole diversity and inclusion and EDI movement has really helped open the door, if you like, to perhaps doing work in a different way and embracing our own diversity. So many organizations have already started this journey, even if they don't necessarily label things as that. But it's then about having a fundamental shift in thinking about the fact that your organization is actually a collective group of people aligned to make a difference in whatever form that might be, whether you're in banking or in legal services or whatever. You're actually there with a product or a support system for the world or for others, rather than seeing your organization as an entity within itself that is something that is not necessarily part of the people space, because it is just people, ultimately. And then what we find is that there's actually no hard answer. um, if you get a great leader, that's one route. If you get a great group of managers really being charismatic and themselves to the point where people love working for them, they wouldn't want to leave because they'd leave that person or those people. And then giving everybody the chance to understand who they are, their values, so that they get the chance to really be themselves, and start that journey. So you'll have people in your life, Jason, where they'll walk in a room and people notice people, and hopefully for a good reason, not for a negative reason.
Not that
not
guy.
the not that guy. Not that. Oh no. There are,
Yeah.
when people
Yeah.
know themselves, and it could just be the security man or woman or person at the door, it changes the culture instantly of a room, a floor, a building, a whole environment, when people have that natural authenticity, when they accept and trust themselves and shine outwards to say, right, how can I make a difference to everybody here? People stop, they notice them, they've got a charisma. Every single person is capable of that. We see it every day. And so it's not, even though it's a big tanker to turn round, it's one I think that is perceived rather than practical.
And I'm assuming that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on an individual level, not just inside the organization. But I can imagine one of the biggest challenges is people almost acknowledging to themselves that A, they don't feel themselves at work, and B, that they feel safe enough to admit that inside the organization. Is that correct?
Well, I don't think people necessarily need to admit it. I don't think I would ever want to turn around to my boss and say, I don't know myself and I'm not being me. I think I'd feel a bit needy if I did. I think it's more of
Okay.
a recognition for you as an individual, to kind of think, well, actually, who am I being here? How am I behaving? It's interesting coming into this podcast. One of the questions that Karen and yourself posed to kind of reflect on ahead of the podcast was, what are you reading right now? And one of the things that I'm reading is a book called Courage, and it's about the joy of living dangerously is what it's called. But by dangerously, what it means, it's by Osho, Osho, if anyone wants to look it up. It's actually a brilliant book that is just designed to encourage us all to accept that if we live in a permanent state of discomfort, then we accept that things can be challenging and changing, and we have more of an adventure, and it is ourself that then is our anchor rather than the world around us giving us comfort. So I think a lot of people, naturally as a human being, what we do is we stay comfortable. We want to be comfortable. And so we get quite stressed with change and, challenge and stresses and people and everything else, and get quite buffeted. And I think there's a definite opportunity for all of us to challenge our comfort zones, and create more of the life and work that we want as a result. So that's probably quite a long answer to your question, but I think it's less about every individual saying to their manager, actually, I think I could be more me and I don't really understand me. I think it's more about, well, if I challenge myself and I start to believe in myself more and push myself a bit and get to know me, then how can I make more of a difference? What does the work that I do then look like? What kind of life could I leave? What will my impact be? Will my productivity go up? Will I get promoted? Will I make this firm more successful or do a better job? Which I think is super exciting.
And in terms of just looking at the basis for this kind of being yourself, I imagine there's a lot of different kind of blended types of frameworks that you're using, like everything from positive psychology to psychological safety to all of the other probably phrases and things that have come out. I mean, are there any particular ones that you see as being kind of quite an impactful framework that you use when working with people?
Completely, yeah. So the way that we work, I think it can get so complex. Just even listening to you, Jason, talk about those different terms, it starts to feel quite almost overwhelming, doesn't it? Where do I begin with these theories? I'm not if I'm in the head of L&D or learning or whatever, I'm not, a scientist. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an academic. For us and for me in our world, I think it's much better to think about it much more simply. How do you help every individual to understand who they are so they can be themselves? So I have a huge love for self-concept theory. You are the world expert on you. The challenge, if you're going to understand yourself, is that actually you need to take a moment in time, which we don't do because we're so busy getting on with it, and be asked and ask yourself the right questions to help you to really discover you. And to create, your values, or, to spend the time to understand what makes you you, so that you can live by that more consciously. And that's self-concept theory. So I'm a massive fan of it, because a lot of people, when you say to them, who are you? They'll say, this is my name, my history, my story, my job role, my experience, what I think about myself, where I live, my kids. All of that is just in your journey. And in your mind, whereas who you really are as Jason is on the inside of you. It's your values, it's your character. And so self-concept, I think, is brilliant and it's very simple. This is not what other people say about you. That's not who you are. I'm sure most people listening and yourself would agree that sometimes, for example, your parents would say, oh, Jason's like this, that's Jason. You go, no, I'm not. Hang on a minute. You aren't who people think you are. You also aren't your 360 feedback, or somebody else's assessment of you, because other people will see you through their own values and experiences. And if most of us aren't being ourselves, particularly in the work environment, that information that people share back with us as feedback or an assessment is incorrect, because actually if we're not being ourselves in the first place, how can people kind of assess us and tell us who we are? So self-concept, if it's worth looking up. There's lots of studies, particularly coming out of the United States, that show that understanding your own self-concept and removing any self-doubt filters from that and looking at that through a positive lens, which is what we do with I Am, is something that, can really help you to understand you. We've got more on our website. If you go to beyourselfatwork.com and look at the I am pages, they can read more about it then. But I think keeping it really simple, this is not rocket science. Help every person to really believe in themselves and understand who they are. Be that person at their best, and naturally everything else will follow.
And is there any correlation between the kind of concept of being yourself and fun, and just actually being able to have fun,
Yeah.
be it in the
I love
office, be it in your personal life?
completely. I love that question. So you know how the Americans they have a completely different meaning to the word fun. I think anyway. Um, here I'm in the UK. Fun means laughter. Basically, fun means having a giggle, telling a joke, pulling someone's leg, those things. Whereas in the US, I think they have a much better definition of fun, which is more about actually, I'm just enjoying this. Whatever I'm doing and whoever I'm being, this is fun. It's something that I'm really enjoying. So people are their happiest when they're themselves. And they connect with people that help them to be themselves. So absolutely, I mean, we measure it when people know who they are and their values. We get an 88%, they report an 88% impact on their positivity and happiness, their fun factor, because they're totally correlated. Yeah. You must find that when you're meeting
And I mean,
friends and
you
family.
mentioned the 88% statistic.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I just wanted to I wanted to understand, because the measuring being yourself, I can imagine, is possibly quite a subjective exercise, because often you tend to kind of, I imagine you can only do this internally, really. But you mentioned the statistic of 88%, so clearly you're measuring something. If I was doing this type of work, and working on the cultures, and working on kind of trying to get people to be their authentic selves at work, how would I go about measuring the efficacy of the work that I'm doing?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So it really is about understanding what the key measures are that actually create the environment within people, within teams, and within the business that correlates to higher productivity, positivity, happiness, and that open, bring your whole self to work, culture. So there are a number of things you definitely want to measure. The first thing is levels of confidence. So levels of confidence, how much do you believe in yourself? How much do you worry about what people think about you? Similar questions that we asked in the Be Yourself at Work survey. How much do you feel like you can be you? Do you understand who you are? Do you feel like you can be yourself with your manager? How happy are you? How often, if you give us a percentage, do you become negative throughout your days? There are things that you can measure, that you can ask, the teams in your organization, and then you can start to build. I mean, people think it's fluffy, which drives me nuts, because actually, this is fundamental science, where actually if you can shift the cognitive thinking within your brain to be more positive about yourself, your environment, and others, it's proven that actually you can think faster, you can be happier, you can make more of a difference, much more productive. So taking these measures and then building in some of that content into the learning and development that you actually administer, whether it's through e-learning and great organizations like you run, Jason, but also, with coaches and with internal development programs to help people to have more confidence and to understand their values, their I ams. So yeah, there are definite measures that you can look at.
Brilliant. And you touched on almost the next question is how much of your work involves, you talked about e-learning and maybe more of that kind of practical type of like rote learning versus coaching, because it sounds to me that this is probably more of a coaching journey than it is possibly a like, here's some stuff you need to kind of learn.
Absolutely.
What is the balance there?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I'm going to have to answer it, but you're going to go, oh, Liz, you sound like you're trying to sell your I am for LMS now. But this is exactly why we did it. So you're absolutely right in that traditionally a coach or a coaching environment would help somebody to reflect more within themselves for their answers and what they're doing and who they are. Absolutely right. But what we found, because I've always believed it, is that actually there is a scalable methodology using technology that actually at scale can help people to have that experience without the expense of coaching for everybody, because it's just not possible to do that. What we do is we have a set number of questions that we ask people to ask themselves and respond to on in-house LMS, so that actually you move through a process that automatically in half an hour creates your values, creates your I am, and gives you tips on how to use them. So it's coaching techniques, but actually all we need to do is use those coaching techniques on ourselves. We just need the help with the questions, which doesn't have to come from a coach or a human. It can actually come from technology, like the world that you're in. Yeah. So sorry if that was
So it's almost like
a
kind of
blatant
keeping a
advert.
pulse survey on the business.
A pulse survey,
Oh,
yeah?
that's all right. You heard it. You heard it here first, folks. Go and check out. Yeah.
You did ask me.
I did. I did. And yeah, I mean, I think that's spot on. I mean, I think there's, you're right. There's more and more awareness on people trying to, you know, I mean, I'll talk about my personal journey. Ever since I first read this incredible book by someone who's sadly no longer with us, a guy called Tony Shea, who wrote Delivering Happiness, I didn't actually understand what it really meant to kind of bring your full self to work. And you know, he kind of talked about it very much from the cultural perspective. But you know, I can attest to how difficult it is, and I empathize with everybody who's kind of having to create these inclusive cultures where everybody can show up every day and be themselves. And it's not practical that everybody shows up every day and is themselves, but you kind of hope that, you know, after 100 days, that more days they've been kind of comfortable showing up as themselves than not. But I've always been a little bit kind of intrigued and fascinated by the rituals that we put in place to kind of engender this safety, this kind of ability for people to be themselves. And obviously, you know, acknowledging that you can, which we've done personally in our values. We call it, you know, be your quirky self. But even in kind of the daily rituals, and I know that this is very difficult for a lot of companies. You know, we every morning as a team check in, and I always try and make sure that you talk about metrics, but my metric is laughter. Is I generally see it if we've been too many days as a team without having a good laugh amongst ourselves, not at anybody else's expense, of course. That's my pulse survey. That something has gone kind of a little bit wrong, and we need to kind of course correct. But I mean, in terms of your experience, have you noticed any other types of processes or kind of, I call them rituals because my wife's an organizational psychologist and that's what she calls them. So, but I mean, do you see any other types of like interventions, initiatives that companies can do to kind of help, you know, kind of build up this safety inside the organization for people to kind of bring themselves to work?
Yeah, definitely. And I think your wife's right. I think rituals is a really good way of saying it. For you, it's that check in with your team, and you're watching for the smile. You're looking to have that fun, and that's your gauge. And what's wonderful about that is that it does two things. It connects you with everybody, and it aligns that lovely sense of belonging and team and humanness at the beginning of the start of each day. So it's a great ritual for everyone to learn from and reflect upon. I think frankly, the biggest ritual that I find makes a difference with our clients is when they actually spend time with themselves rather than distracting themselves. So coming back to the point of rituals, having a moment at the beginning of your day, might be 5 minutes, might be 30 seconds, just to actually check in with you, how you're feeling, what you're doing, what you're going to plan for today. Before then getting going is that sounds very simple, but you'd be amazed how many people, quite frankly, just don't do it. And so it's having that moment, and also doing the same at the end of your working time. Just reflecting on, having a moment as a ritual. Maybe you write it down, maybe it's part of your rhythm to actually think about what you're going to do, later or the next day. What have I learned? What's gone really well because of me? What would I like to change? And then, just kind of having that check-in, for you as an individual. I think as well, there's some brilliant apps out there and technology that allow an organization to almost do the same thing and get a read, like a pulse survey, get a read of what it feels like within that world. But I think for any organization, if there is never a moment where you come together regularly, then that should be a really clear signal that you're not creating an environment necessarily where people can feel like they belong and feel safe enough to be able to be them. So I think there are rhythms and rituals for managers and leaders and whole organizations, whether it's recorded podcasts or a quick message or a 5-minute team meeting at midday every day or whatever, that most leaders we know completely underestimate. So many people we know as leaders have to remind themselves to give people feedback or to encourage people by putting sort of ding dongs on their phone or reminders in their calendar, because we're all so busy, we're just human. But yeah, definitely. I think team time together, organizational communication time together, coming in and checking with yourself, are all great examples that actually don't cost lots of money or take lots of time, that can really make a big difference.
Yeah, and you touched on one there as well, which I think is also equally important, is recognition. Because I think that's a great way of building confidence, is kind of creating that recognition culture of allowing, like I always believe that there's nothing more powerful than peer recognition, because I think we all expect our managers to say, you're doing a great job, pat on the back. But yet when it comes from your peers, I always feel that carries so much more weight.
It does. It does. But what about if it comes from yourself? So we would also encourage everyone to build into
Ooh,
development
deep, man.
programs.
Yeah.
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 So, if you think that I'm a big advocate of
Yeah.
appreciation of each other, but, you know, if you can actually build into your programs, telling yourself what went well rather than waiting for your peers or your manager to tell you
I
what
love
went
that.
well or relying on it, you become much more resilient.
I love that. That was great. Great feedback. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you've now given me a real nugget to kind of think about.
Good.
So, I always ask two questions at the end, just to close out. You have already answered the one of them, which is the book or podcast. So I will ask the other
Okay.
one.
Okay.
So we've talked about a lot of stuff. There's a lot of there's you've said it's quite simple, but in reality, I think a lot of people are going to see, when it comes to human dynamics and human behavior, it's I always, as coming from a world of engineering, I always say, everything is quite simple and logical until you put human beings into the picture, and then suddenly it just gets super complicated. So if other people were going on this journey, and if they were kind of looking to tap in from your incredible wealth of experience, obviously they can go to your site and you'll be yourself at work and look at your I am frameworks. But what's the one piece of advice that you would give other leaders trying to go on this journey or make an impact in this space or with their teams?
Wow, now that's a really big question. And I could give you 20 answers. but I try and give you one.
Yes.
And I'm just going to use one word, which is innovation. One of the things that I've experienced doing this for 20 years around the world with large firms, global firms, SMEs, is that we innovate in technology all the time. We innovate in our products, our processes, but we never really use innovation when we think about getting the best out of our people. We rely on the tried and tested. We use our ancient psychometrics. What's been done before, we'll question and look at the ROI. So stand in your people, stand in your culture, and open your mind up and your heart as well, because actually we're, as humans, we're as much driven by our hearts as we are by our heads. And just question and innovate, because it's actually really, really rare that innovation in the people space happens within organizations. So you can be the starting point of that.
Great advice. Brilliant. Thank you, Liz. And thank you for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure and a joy having you on the show. And you've given me a lot to think about. And I'm sure that everybody watching this would find this hugely valuable, and also, feel like they've maybe got some work to do themselves, unless they're lucky enough to be one of the 5%.
Absolutely. Well, you can all choose to be. You keep being you, Jason.
That sounds like a Dr. Seuss recommendation. Be the you can be.
There you go.
All right. Thank you, Liz.
You're welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Impact Learning Visionaries. If you found it interesting or helpful, please subscribe by clicking on the button down below so you don't miss our next one. Also, be sure to check out our Reality Bites blog for more information on how technology is aiding in learning development. Links are all in the description below. Go check it out. Thanks a lot. Bye.